Thank you very much. So we have a perfect segue from this morning's conversation, opening conversation about life and politics, looking at women in the media. And the question we're asking is, are women framed to falter? To moderate this session, we have Shari Graydon, who is with Media Action, and the driving force behind Informed Opinions, which is looking at how we can get more women's voices in the media. I'd like to ask Shari to come on up and to introduce the panel. Thank you very much, Shari.
Thank you, Chi. I am delighted to be joined by a fabulous panel of very distinguished commentators. I'm not going to read their entire bios because you have those in your packages, but they include author and veteran political columnist, journalist Susan Delacourt, senior writer for the Toronto Star, one of the most respected universally respected broadcasters in the country, Steve Paikin, host of TVO's The Agenda and an award-winning documentary producer, media trainer extraordinaire Laura Peck, vice president of the McLoughlin Media and Ottawa Institution, and University of Ottawa professor Joanne St. Louis, a longtime equality rights advocate and bencher with the Law Society of Upper Canada. My own background includes 10 years as president of Media Action and press secretary very briefly for Ujjal Dosanjh when he served as Premier of British Columbia. Together, we are going to explore three essential questions. One, do in fact the media frame women to fail? And if so, how does that work? Number two, what's our best advice for female candidates to avoid or overcome such framing? And three, what can we collectively do, all of us, to challenge or change that? I'm going to start by referring to the column Gary.
There's resistance that goes on in the classroom. And I said, what is going fine? And she says, well, it must be really difficult for you as a black woman. And I said, you know, let me explain something here. Because I'm a black woman doesn't mean everything is happening doubly and triply to me. In all honesty, we survived slavery, and I happen to think these young boys in the classroom don't have a chance. Like it's scorched earth, it's my classroom. So my experience and my attitude and my cultural frame was actually one that didn't say I was enfeebled, but I actually walk around feeling doubly empowered by both locations, because the history of who I am means that I already have so many capacities built in for survival, adaptation, that I'm going to be successful. So I think that's what we have to bring into that space. The piece that I think, and the one point I would say about the frame and the failure piece, I actually don't think it's about the women who enter into the arena. I think it's about us as women. Louder. I think it's about us as women. You know, think about it. A woman enters and we don't have critical mass. We pin all our hopes and expectations on her. The level of criticism and expectation we have on her to be responsive to whatever it is we perceive of that particular policy, regardless of party. We actually sometimes engage in a level of critique of women that their male counterparts who've done squat, decades of squat on exactly the same issues, we've never vilified in the way we vilified the women candidate that's suddenly sitting in power. You know? It's sort of, and quite honestly, that was what I did an early presentation on Obama, and that is what I said. It was immediately after the election, and they said, what do you think is the most dangerous thing for Obama? And I said, it is going to be the lack of reasonableness about what that man can accomplish from that position. There is an assumption that he's there to do change everything he's done, and of course, just recently, who was it? I'm trying to remember, oh yes, a serious and deep political pundit, I think it was Matt Damon, commented on how he now had to withdraw his support for Obama, and I'm thinking, what? You're not catching your backside, I usually use a different word in the classroom, you know, trying to figure out how to juggle that superpower and all of those different exigencies and a country in a financial crisis, and you're saying he's a failure. My view is a woman can go in and probably be the best at that job, but the level of criticisms will so cloud our ability to assess what she's accomplished. So the failure to frame is also, I think, flipped around to what is the responsibility we have when women enter into the domain. I'm not saying don't critique the policy. Far be it from me to say that, because that's what I do. But we've got to not participate in eroding their legitimacy to be there. We've got to do it in such a way that when we want to critique that woman, she is part of a machine and a party. Why would you only be talking about her? Why would you not be talking about others similarly located? I think I've gotten the hook. But that's a start.
Only because we want to hear more from you. So we are going to invite people to come up to the microphone with questions, but as you're formulating your questions and making your way up, I'm going to pick up on something, Susan, you said. You talked about just recently being accused on Twitter of being upset about something, and your counter was, I'm not upset, I'm against whatever it was. Language is one of the ways that I think women are sometimes, quote, framed to fail. And thinking again back to Kim Campbell, who was asked by a female reporter at the Vancouver Sun, what is your dress size? And Kim Campbell rightly declined to give her dress size, but then the reporter reported that Kim Campbell declined to give her dress size, which was an equally unfortunate framing. I'm wondering if the panelists have any concrete, snappy comebacks for female candidates when they are asked a question that is inappropriate and, at essence, sexist, a question that would not be asked of male counterparts.
What's yours?
What's yours?
Yeah. What's your dress size? What's yours? That's the simplest way, I think, to stop it is just to say, you're treading into an area. If you want to go down this road, you're fair game too.
I think my own experience in media training women often is that we're pleasers, and we really, when we're asked a question, we feel compelled to actually answer the question. And so we find ourselves responding before the snappy comeback occurs to us. So maybe anticipating those questions is a good strategy too. Anybody else have suggestions?
I can just think of one experience that I had that was like that. It wasn't quite a media context. It was when I was working for the James Bay Cree. I was the special assistant to the Grand Chief, and we were in negotiations with the federal government. We were in a meeting. I was the only woman in the room. And after this meeting, I'm there. I'm a lawyer. I'm participating in this very serious meeting. And at the end of it, one of the members of the staff to the minister, in front of everybody, looks me up and down and said, "Nice dress." And so now I have all these men staring at me. This tells you something about my personality, because this is what I actually did. I stopped. I looked at him up and down. And then I stared at the most precious part of his anatomy. And I said, "Nice suit." And I walked off. And my side said, "Joanne, we scored that one. That was a victory." I think sometimes it's not to take the thing seriously. It's to actually put it back into this tiny place it belongs. Sometimes just actually answering, critiquing, even if you want to respond, if you respond in that way, you actually blow it up. You make it a bigger thing than it is. So that would probably be my advice. A little bit of sarcasm, a bit of humor, and if you can add a little dollop of public shaming, that's usually the best recipe.
Okay, it looks like we have women lining up at the mic, so I'm going to start at the back. Woman in the gray sweater, yes.
Hi there, my name's Kimberly Darlington. I'm visiting from Montreal today. I recently ran for the Liberal nomination in my riding, and I was the only woman running, and I was unsuccessful. But during the time, I was reading a book by Dee Dee Myers, who worked in the Clinton White House, and a comment that she made really stuck with me, and it's very true in my experience. If you're looking at TV or anything where you're seeing an image of a woman, be it a candidate or a media personality, you check the hair. And if the hair is weird or it's flat or it's flying around, you get distracted and you forget what she's saying, and it could be incredibly interesting, important, informative. I see this all the time with my mother. She's watching CNN. Oh, I don't like her hair. And I think this is a reality that it's going to be impossible to change. I hope I can see it change in my lifetime, but as we get to be more of a visual society, I don't see this changing. So my question is, when I'm faced with somebody like my mother who says, I don't like Michelle Obama, well, why, Mom? You don't like her, her philosophies on healthy eating? No, she has crooked teeth. How do we deal with that? Do we buy into that? Do we get a bunch of makeup and do our hair and try to look our best to sort of cancel out that kind of negativity? Or do we just say, no, we're not participating in that. We want to try and change the paradigms and just be accepted for our intelligence and what we have to say?
My own response to that, as somebody who did hundreds of media interviews as the president of Media Watch, as a national spokesperson for a feminist organization, the very first interview I did was about the demise of the Miss Canada pageant, which I was celebrating, and I marshaled my comments into a 10-second soundbite, went out on the street, did the interview, felt really pretty good about it until the phone rang, and it was my ordinarily supportive mother calling me to tell me that I looked awful. And for context, and I think this is really what's important about the story, is my 10-second clip was wedged between Miss Canada 1991 and Miss Canada 1990. And even though I was 30, I think it had escaped my mother's attention prior to that moment that I was actually not a beauty queen myself. So I take your point, and I would say that when you're going on TV and there are lights in particular, accept a little bit more makeup than you might ordinarily. But at the same time, I would say what we really need are more women on television who don't pluck their eyebrows. Every time Chantal Hébert goes on CBC National with her sometimes disheveled hair and her generally uncoiffed appearance, and is unbelievably intelligent and funny and thoughtful and insightful, we need more women who look like women look like, regardless of how we look. That would be one of my comments. Okay, next question.
Oui, bonjour, mon nom est Mélanie F.
My name is Melanie F. Book from New Brunswick. My question is for Joanne. I'd like to know why the media stress so much that women have a private life, they have a family, they have to keep care of the kids, whereas a man will never have to submit to that kind of perspective. I learned my French 45 years ago in Hamilton, Ontario, so perhaps it won't be quite good enough to answer your question. Joanne, how's your French? Would you like to start then? Well, I'll try to answer. I'll make a bunch of mistakes, of course, in my French grammar, but I did understand your question. I really did. I think that the problem we have here is one of the concept or the idea, the perception that we have of political life. There's this notion that there's a separate women's issues. Women's issues, are of concern are raising kids, family life, wiping snotty noses. It's not for everybody, but that's women's business.
Of putting all of those things as being attached to women contributes to why men in the public life and in our conversations have no accountability. Because there is this ongoing reinforcing dynamic that says, that's a woman's issue, that's a woman's problem, that's a woman's responsibility. So we don't have the notion that when women take on those roles and responsibilities, it's not just a contribution to the family, it's a contribution to the broader community. One or the other would have to reproduce the children. For us to have a society to continue, we need children. One or the other would get pregnant. The difference is, given the context we're in, if men could suddenly become pregnant, it would be a sacrament. Okay? That's the attitude. and I'm not being sarcastic about it, there's the sense that when men do things connected to children, we celebrate that. He's a wonderful man. What is business as usual for women is something extraordinarily wonderful when it's done by a man. And we contribute to that partially because we want to reshape their behavior and get more of them, so it's positive reinforcement, like you say to your child, okay, that's a good thing, dear, so that they want to do it again. But the consequence of it is we still don't rebalance and actually shift the dynamic. I think your question is an extremely important one, but part of it goes back to the very issue of just language and framing. This is just one of those areas that if we ourselves don't rethink how we look at it, it shouldn't be taken for granted. I'm a person who doesn't have children of my own. And so I understand it's work. We should talk about it as work. It's not just family life. It's not an optional lifestyle. Somebody has to have children, and children are important to society as a whole. I have an investment in other people's children, even if I don't have children of my own. It's not a woman's issue, it's a community issue.
Susan.
It's a far more articulate way of saying that. What I was trying to point out is that we often tend to present raising children and having a life as somehow leisure or somehow a luxury. And all of you, I don't have children either, but I know well that people who do, it is work, and it's not something that's distinguished, that you do for a break from your job. It's something that actually is part of an integrated life experience.
It's another job.
Yes. So, yeah, when I say I really do think we've got to stop talking about work-life balance, because it sounds like all women want to do is go off at home and live like those 1950s sitcoms, right? And that's not the way things are.
Okay. Question here at the front.
Hi, my name's Renuma, and I'm from Calgary, and I'm studying here in Ottawa right now. So I find that in the Canadian media, women in politics are often categorized or sensationalized into these caricatures. An example of that is I remember a few years back a national newspaper featuring a headline that referred to Belinda Stronach as a blonde bombshell. And it's a subtle example, but I think if it was a male politician, we would never refer to him in those terms. So what I want to know is, why do you think this tendency is not only so prevalent, but accepted?
I'm going to challenge the premise of your question a little bit. I'm not sure that it's accepted. It's prevalent. This just in, there is a double standard. We all know that. But when I read Nobody's Baby, Sheila Cops's book from 25 years ago, and I certainly remember what things were like 25 years ago when she was, for example, trying to, be a mother and a politician at the same time. And it was way harder back then. I think we, at least I hope we have made a great deal of progress in the last 25 years on some of these things. So, but every now and then you are right. Every now and then it comes back. I'm not sure Gary Mason's, I read his column too, and I was quite fascinated by how he very categorically, and I like him a lot, I've never met him, but I like him a lot as a columnist. And I was intrigued at how categorically he said, the next election in British Columbia won't be determined at all on the basis of gender. It will be exclusively on the basis of merit and who can do the job better. I'm not sure that's the world we live in either, but it seems to me we're way ahead today of where we were 25 years ago. Don't you think? No?
Susan.
Okay, I'm willing to go. I think I know the paper you're talking about. I have this horrible feeling it may be my own. Shari has raised this point too. It's a matter of sheer numbers. It sounds like a facile answer, but we often have to catch ourselves because we refer to women politicians, by their first name. Belinda,
Kim,
Sheila, and we ran a series on Belinda's election. Here I'm doing it again. One was we decided it was okay. I think because Stronach gets her mixed up with her father, and that's the problem. There are not enough women in politics right now so that they actually can be distinguished by their first name. We don't have 17 Belindas. We don't have 30 Kims. And what we actually need are a bunch more women in there so that it is ridiculous to single out one politician. She was not, if I recall the headline correctly, just it was a sexist, stupid headline, but the bombshell was her leaving cabinet. You know, that was and I would argue that Peter MacKay did as much to sensationalize that and make it into a story about sex instead of politics. It had been proceeding along as a political story until he decided to make it about the breakup of his relationship, right? So, you know, there's guilt all around there.
I think one of the other things that women run up against in politics is that because we still are so underrepresented, we are therefore more newsworthy on one level, and so anything that's different becomes by definition more newsworthy. And so when you have a young, wealthy, attractive, blonde, long-haired politician, that attracts focus because it's not the norm of the middle-aged white guy who's a lawyer who comes from Bay Street wearing a navy blue suit. And she frequently wore very fashionable clothing, and that got a lot of attention too, and that probably fed into that stereotype. Question at the back.
Yeah, on the language, Steve, I just want to comment that when you talked about Joanne, you talked about her as a pistol and as TNT. And these are destructive words, and that is you know, the sports allegories and so on are the other things that make it clear that political leadership is not for women, these kinds of power words. So I think you owe Joanne an apology. I wanted to also, you know, I can be a little difficult with you because you appear in my bedroom so often and I never turn you off. You said that an equal number of men and women don't want the job, and that's true. There are a very small minority of either men or women who want to be politicians. But let's say we wanted 154 seats in the House of Commons for women. It would take approximately 500 candidates, and I'm pretty sure out of a population of 33 million, there are 500 women who are willing to take on the challenge. You said it depends on men deciding to change and to be supportive. And I'm sure you meant scrubbing the kitchen floor or changing the diapers. But the change that's really necessary is in the political parties, for men to decide that it's not just the faces that have always been there that can do the job. And in my opinion, we need to implement a recommendation that was made nearly 25 years ago to provide the political parties with financial rewards for electing women. And I hope Equal Voice will take on that. One final question, and I think, Joanne, it was you who said, what's the responsibility when women do enter into politics? And I think our responsibility is to get out there and contribute money and help them and volunteer for their campaigns. And I give Equal Voice this challenge. Start informing all our members who the women candidates are across this country. Encourage our members to get out there and work on their campaigns, contribute to their campaigns, and give them tips on what you can do to help. And that will do more to get more women into Parliament than all of us sitting here and talking about it again.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I feel I should make a little response to some of that, and I hope despite all of my egregious transgressions, you'll still continue to have me in your bedroom every night. That would really be nice. Let me just give you an example of what we try to deal with on a daily basis on this program I do on TVO called The Agenda. We're covering all the same stuff as the Toronto Star, right? We're covering the big world out there. And most of the ponds, if I can put it this way, are the lakes that we are fishing in for guests. You know, you say it should be easy to find 500 women out there if you want to have 160 some odd female MPs. We are fishing for guests in lakes and streams where the number of participating males versus females is 90-10, okay? Or 80-20 if we're lucky. So most of the programs we're going to end up doing, and gender balance on our program is my top priority. I mean, besides the obvious, get it right, you know, be fair, all that. In terms of the composition of our guests, gender parity is my top priority on the program. And I know it's the top priority of our management as well. And if you go on and watch our program, you will see that despite the fact that it's our top priority, we're nowhere close to 50-50 in terms of male and female guests. Because when you're doing a daily, when you're running a daily newspaper or you're working on a daily show, the sad reality is there are 9 available male guests for every 1 available female guest. And I still haven't figured out, given that math, how we achieve 50-50 on our program, particularly since the 9 male guests who are available to be on the show probably will not have a situation where they're going to have to say to their spouse, can you make dinner tonight instead because I got this invitation to go on TV? Whereas a woman may have a harder time. It's been our experience. I've heard it from our guests. It's harder for women to get out of that second job and give it to somebody else to do so they can come to our studios at 8 o'clock at night and do a TV show. That's our issue.
Thank you, Stephen. I just want to make another plug for Informed Opinions, which is developing a database of women experts who will be available and willing and ready and keen to provide their expertise on shows like yours. We have about 8 minutes left, and I'd like to get the 4 remaining questions. So I'm going to ask for the first 2 women to give questions. We'll have responses, and then we'll go to the last 2 questions. So your question.
Merci, bonjour. Je m'appelle Désirée Mogras. Je suis directrice générale de la Fondation.
And I'm the director of a foundation, Montreal.
Canada's first Governor General, Speaker of the House, and first Cabinet Minister elected from Quebec. I chose that job instead of running for office. I had been asked by a former Prime Minister to run in his riding when he stepped down. And it was a heart-wrenching decision because I had a 2-year-old son and planned to have another child who's making lots of noise today. And it was a difficult decision because I grew up thinking my dream was to be a politician. I never thought about being a mother. But the reality was I didn't think I could do both jobs well. When I go into politics, I want to kick some ass. Sorry for the violent, reference. And I don't think I personally can do that with a young family. But that's my choice. And I feel like a lot of the discussion today, and I guess this is my question, the panel revolves around women's choices. There's enough women out there who are willing to run. There's enough women out there who are not risk averse to make 50% of Parliament. And I'd like to see us address more of the structural issues. I made the decision I made. That was my choice. But there are enough women out there who are willing to do it. It's the right time in their life or whatever it is. The structures, a minority Parliament, the schedule of Parliament makes it hard for anyone with a young family, men or women. There's so many things that I think we need to be looking at the macro level. We keep coming back to this issue about a woman's choice to run. Does she feel, confident enough, or someone's waiting to ask her? There's enough women. So can we please, at this conference, do and not just talk, and look at the structural issues that make it very difficult for women to run, even if they're confident and ready to do it.
Thank you very much for raising the point about structural issues. Can I have a question at the back?
It's not a question, it's a comment. When someone says to me, you should da-da-da-da, as they did with Kim Campbell, I remind them that their question has everything to do with them and nothing to do with me. How we think is everything, and I just hold it up for them to see that. So I offer that as a way for you to deal with what sounds like criticism or whatever.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question.
Hi, my name is Aruba, and I just want to speak to the theme of we've all been talking about the way women are and the way men are, and I feel like when you assume a position in a public space, you always get framed as, or you get represented by your labels. So for me, it's more pronounced in the small-scale leadership roles I have assumed. It's not only just that I'm a woman, but I'm also a woman of color, and a woman of color that follows a certain religion and wears head covering. And with that, there's a lot of expectations and assumptions about the way you will be and the people that you're voicing. And for me, I feel like if I do ever enter a political career, I'll be framed as a representative for women that I don't necessarily represent. So how do you work towards not reinforcing these dichotomies?
Okay, great question. I'm wondering, Laura?
If I may, what was your name again?
Aruba.
Ariba. Did I say your name correctly?
Yeah.
I've sent around to everybody these little cards, and it's sort of a how-to. And you need to be able to give yourself a positioning statement. You need to figure out ahead of time, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? How am I going to get my message out? And on these little cards, it sort of gives you a structure of the way to think about how to represent yourself. So even if I met you at the coffee shop or I met you at an Equal Voice discussion, you would be able to effortlessly get that message out about who you are, what you think you could do as an elected representative. And it's amazing. The more times you say it, then the more authentic it becomes. And the more you own it, and it feels good. And I hope you do run. I hope you win.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Joanne? It's a hard question, really.
It is and it isn't. Because I can hear part of your question because I actually hear it from my students, and I do a lot of mentoring. And one of the things that I see at the heart of solving the dilemma that you're talking about is that what is the heart of that dilemma? What do you mean by that dilemma? If you're already conflicted about those identity politics issues, it becomes much more difficult because you're much more vulnerable to the advice you're getting, the different ways in which you can be constructed. I think the stronger your core is, you take that with you into the space. I think the myth is that it is impossible to be successful the more off-center you are to that norm. And in the culture that we live in, that norm has racial, religious, socioeconomic, it has a whole bunch of layerings of identity to it. And so it almost makes you feel that the farther away you are from the norm, you're already set up to fail or to do less well. That's what you have to invert in your own mind, and you surround yourself with people who are not confused in that way. I think the vulnerability you have is when you move away from your own center thinking it will make you more electable or more winnable. You just are not properly anchored enough for the resistance you are going to experience anyway around those very issues. So I simply think it's not worth it to try to adapt yourself to the external. Anchor yourself fully in what the internal is. Figure out what your lines are in the sand, and then you can choose to be strategic. Speak more or less on particular issues, modify yourselves to context, come up with a media strategy. But you yourself have to be pretty strong and solid. You cannot allow other people to negotiate for you that public persona. Don't let that happen.
Thank you. And I'm going to now invite the woman behind you to ask her question.
Hi, my name is Samantha. I'm a PhD student at the University of Ottawa, and my question pertains specifically to those of you who are members of the media. Given that an important part of your job is engaging and attracting viewers and audience members, how do you negotiate between what is newsworthy and what is transgressing boundaries and stereotypes in terms of framing women in politics?
That means we're out of time, but does somebody want to... Susan?
We should both just...
And we have one additional webcast question.
All right. I don't have an adequate answer to that question, and it's something we work on every day. And I will tell you, we screw it up every day. Right? It's not an exact science. We learn from our mistakes. As I said, in the 2004 election campaign, the Toronto Star, great small L liberal institution, actually devoted a series to Belinda, the Belinda factor or something like that. We make mistakes. We're just going to have to do it every day and get around it, you know. And speaking of Belinda Stronach, can I just answer Desiree's question? At the last Equal Voice event I was at, Belinda Stronach actually raised this issue. And she said that why don't we take advantage of new technology and stuff to relieve the burden from women of having to come to Ottawa. And yeah, there are other ways of doing this. And I think I don't think this panel can answer them now, but I think you're right to say that there are structural ways that we've got to get at this.
Okay, and one final question, because we are out of time and lunch is waiting for you all. This is an echo of the question we already had about structure, and it's directed specifically to you, Steve. What structural changes in the way media operate are necessary, do you think, in order to portray women fairly?
In 30 seconds
30
or
words
less.
or less, yeah.
Well, let me try this. I have and had a fabulous mother. And I think, despite the comments that I heard earlier, from you, yes, I think she raised me to aspire to and to, you know, in my dealings with women, do all of the things that this conference stands for. I hope she did. It was a long time ago when she did it, but I think she did, and I hope she did. And I guess if, you know, Susan talks about how it's changing, we screw it up every day, but it's changing. The people who ran our newsrooms, and I've worked in some newsrooms that were like this as well, you know, 30 years ago, where they were all men of a certain age, with a certain attitude about women in the workforce. And those folks are slowly leaving us. And the people who are replacing them, I think, have a more, I think, have a more modern view of the world. So if you have a strong female role model as a mother, as I did, and if you are influenced by that, as I think I was, and if you are dealing with more people of a similar thinking in this world, then hopefully we get at that issue that that person referred to. I hope. But what do I know?
Okay. Well, thank you for the valiant effort at responding, and thank to all of the 4 panelists for sharing their context and expertise here today. We are now going to acknowledge their participation and invite you to